So I get the last one before break, which is, I'm not sure if that's good or bad, but hopefully I can make it interesting. A couple of interesting tidbits of information. Fairly quiet weather pattern overall after what was pretty crazy first part of the month for November. It felt more like January, I guess. I've got a couple of just stats and random things I found I thought was interesting to share, and then I'll go through a discussion of the current weather and what's to come. Happy to take any questions throughout. For those who don't know me, I graduated in 2011 from Penn State. Had a couple different roles at AccuWeather, first as an operational meteorologist, then on some of our research and development efforts, and then just in the last 2 months moved back into a leadership role in our forecasting department. So back to the weather every day. So, and if you want to find me on Twitter or email, that's where you can do so. Here's the last week of records across the U.S. A lot of them. The first half of November has been quite unusual. I think, a good overview of what's gone on. And a lot of daily records, a handful of monthly records, and it should replay here again. It's much further behind on there. No, it's not actually.
Is that animation available on the internet?
Yeah.
Or you created it AccuWeather?
No, this is on coolwx.com, and they have they've got really cool stuff. They've got cool stuff. Yeah. They have a global, U.S. only, and one other one, and they've got the last week, the last month, and the last like 90 days or something. Yeah.
You know who runs that? That's Bob Hart.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Hurricane guy studied under Jenny Evans.
So this is the CoolWex site, global temperature records page, and they've got you can do a year of animations. You'd be there for a while watching that, and then we got U.S. and Europe breakdown. So this is just the last week animation, which I found interesting, and there were a couple of records in California too. So where there's cold, there's usually warmth elsewhere, and even a few records in Florida, which I'll touch on here. So overall, pretty interesting weather pattern for the last week, and I guess just to show that from more of a meteorological standpoint, here's the last 5 days, 500 millibar pattern and surface for the northern hemisphere. Obviously a significant trough, and you got a pretty good, almost cross-polar flow, at least from like the Northwest Territories, the Yukon, which really allowed us to get into the single digits and below zero in some places in the Midwest, making it one of the coldest starts, if not the coldest start of November in the record books in places like Chicago. And that sort of that lingered for much of the week, and a couple of ejections of this Arctic air that was rotating around the northern part of Canada. And in the last couple of days, we've seen that sort of lift out. Still ridging in the west, so you still have a bit of this flow of air from northwest Canada into the east, although we have been a bit more ridgy in the east. But this cutoff low that brought the some significant winds and rain to coastal Carolinas moving out has kept the northeast on the cooler side, but still ridge in the west. But that is changing, which is good news for them getting into their finally into the wet season, which is, as I'll show here in a bit, is on the later side compared to normal. Just to highlight how cold we've been, on the left is the last 2 weeks, and on the right is the last month or so. The heart of the departures on the cooler side have been to our west here across the Midwest and into the Great Lakes and parts of the Tennessee and Mississippi Valley regions. But it's significant over a month here on the right to be 8 to 10 degrees below normal. We've been on the cooler side, at least in the last 2 weeks, and slightly cooler for the last month or so, and obviously warmer than normal in the west. This just summarizes what I showed earlier, but this is the first half of the month totally, and there's your average 500 millibar pattern with as you might expect, a significant trough in the east, helping to keep us on the colder side. A couple departures just to highlight. It's anywhere between 6 and 10 degrees or 12 degrees below normal for the first half of the month. The November 1 to 15 average in Chicago was 31.2, which is the coldest first half of the month since they began records. The previous record was 31.4. So very cold first half of the month in Chicago. pretty amazing to have an average temp of below freezing for two weeks in November. A couple other interesting statistics. 2 new record lows that were tied in Chicago, 13 degrees and 7 degrees on the 11th and 12th. Yesterday was a very interesting day in Florida. If anyone was looking at Florida yesterday, I saw some of the Moss guidance busted by 10 to 12 degrees down there. They had temps in the low 70s or upper 60s, and it was in the low 60s or upper 50s in a lot of parts of Florida yesterday, which was a record low max for Fort Lauderdale and Miami, going all the way back. It blew it out of the water in Fort Lauderdale, 62, which the old record was 70 for the day. Many parts of Pennsylvania having the top 5 coldest start of the month through the 16th, and Steve Seaman tweeted out an interesting stat a couple days ago that the 29 degrees here on the 13th was just one of 7 days where the max has been below 30 in the first half of November since 1893. And it's only happened twice in the last 100 years. So certainly a cold start of the month. I will get to this in a second. We'll talk about the western storm because that's probably the most interesting piece of weather going on across the U.S. right now. But to go into the what's happening currently, blow this up a little bit. Coastal low, well offshore, that brought saw a gust of 81 on some platform 30 miles offshore, but I think the highest gusts in the Carolinas were probably the 50 to 60 mile an hour range over the weekend. Could see some gusts probably to 50 or so, maybe in Nantucket, Martha's Vineyard tonight as this moves off to the north and east. Got a warm front moving through the Dakotas. A weak front here pushing east across the Ohio Valley. And see the storm starting to move into the west, which will be the basis for much needed rain and mountain snow, and maybe even an increased fire threat in Northern California, which I'm not sure has been talked about as much. Sort of a reduction in fire threat across the southern part of the state, but with some of the winds on the back side of it, could increase the fire threat northeast of San Francisco by Tuesday night into Wednesday. As you might expect with this map, not a lot of features that stand out, and not a lot of moisture either. Pretty quiet radar loop here this morning with some showers in the Carolinas, and they're an interesting band of snow and maybe some rain mixed in across parts of Ontario, and then some showers with this warm advection across the Dakotas, and you can see the beginning of this storm system here starting to move into the Seattle region, just on the edge of the radar. Satellite, very quiet across the west, basically a clear start of the day. You've got the clouds associated with our system here off the east coast. I don't think there's anything too interesting on the features here, but you've got a nice cyclone off to the east and a cutoff low that's going to sort of get sucked up into this trough that moves on shore in the west over the coming couple days. I'm not sure, is that what's left of Raymond? Anyone know? Down in the It might be what's left of Raymond down here. I think it is, off the coast of the Baja. And overall, though, just fairly quiet across most of the nation. Closer to home here, I'll just pull up some of the surface obs in the northeast this morning. Pretty gusty, as you might expect. Along the coast, I was at work last night, and we were having some conversations about whether what the freezing drizzle threat was across the Hudson Valley this morning. I didn't see any reports of any ice. I'm not sure if anyone else did, but looked like it never really moistened up in the lowest levels enough to create a drizzle issue. I think maybe the wind just ended up staying a bit more northerly than more out of the east, and we just never got the low level moisture in there. And the temps ended up above freezing in most spots too. Never really got down to the freezing mark. So I don't think there were many issues. Maybe in some some areas that were protected and some of the elevated road surfaces. But overall, not much of an ice issue today. Just really a windy and damp day across most of the east, which is cloudy, low overcast, windier as you head to the east. Looks like some sun though trying to peek through across western parts of the state into Ohio. And then you've got this band of rain and snow. Looks like Toronto's reporting rain currently at 34. There's probably some snow further back to the west on some of the higher ground of Ontario. And with that front, I thought this was interesting. Across the Dakotas this morning, we have a very windy morning with gusts to 43 in Rapid City, 56 degrees behind the front, into the 30s as you head further east. That's still ahead of the front here, across parts of southwest Minnesota and eastern South Dakota. So, let me pull up. I guess just to quickly go back to this potential drizzle situation this morning that didn't really unfold. This was the sounding from 12Z from Albany. Certainly would have been frozen had it moistened up in the low levels, but never really did. It was moist in the mid levels but never got down to the surface, so pretty good dew point depression of 11. And it just didn't end up unfolding. So it was a very borderline situation. Those are always tough because you don't want to let, like, if you don't say anything and there hasn't, you know, if there's just enough moisture, you can get a serious ice issue in some of those situations. So, all right. Any questions, comments so far? So, looking at sort of where we're going with the weather over the next couple days, let's start in the west with the pretty significant storm system, really the first one of the season, which is on the later side. I saw this morning. If rain arrives in Fresno and Bakersfield by Wednesday, it'll be the third latest start of the wet season on record in those two areas. So definitely later than normal in most of the west here with the beginning of the rainy season. This cutoff low, this is the Euro from 0Z this morning. Probably sort of spin there and then finally get caught up in this trough as it digs into Northern California by tomorrow afternoon, and then it gets swept up in it as it moves to the east. And this is really going to set the stage for, you get a lot of good precipitation here across the southwest, and an increased plume of moisture, probably with what was left of Raymond and just pulling in moisture from the Pacific there, is going to allow for areas of some heavier rainfall, maybe some flooding across parts of the mountains of Southern California into Arizona, and then snow in the mountains of northern Arizona, like Flagstaff. We can get several inches as we head into Tuesday night and Wednesday. This trough looks like pretty good agreement between the GFS here and the Euro. Pretty impressive as it starts to roll eastward, although it's fairly slow, and that will definitely affect the downstream forecast with how slow this thing tries to get itself out of the southwest by the end of the week or so. How does that look at the surface? Here's the Euro for this evening. Still dry. You don't have any moisture return yet across California. And then by tomorrow evening, starting to get some moisture to pull into the parts of southwest Arizona along the Colorado River. And then really gets going by Tuesday evening into Wednesday. Probably the best chance of rain across like the San Diego, LA area is probably later tomorrow night into Wednesday. And then the heaviest rain probably falls during the day Wednesday, or in most areas, I would think. I guess to get a sense of some of the moisture from this system, here's the precipitable water. This is from the European Ensemble. It's the European Ensemble mean, and then against the anomaly. So this is the anomaly of precipitable water on the desert south, well, across the U.S., but specifically we'll focus on the southwest. Pretty significant by tomorrow night. Several standard deviations above normal. I was looking at, I think, San Diego Climatology. Looks like precipitable water values get up close to, I had it here. Here's tomorrow night. Close, 1.2. 1.25 inches, and the climatology there is, like, the records are right, for this time of year are right around the 1.25 inch mark. So a significant influx of moisture there by tomorrow night into Wednesday. And then on the backside, I mentioned the potential for maybe an increased fire threat. I mean, there's two parts to this. One is that they've had obviously the fires in Southern California, which this will help to reduce that threat, which is great. But without the moisture across parts of the central portion of California, here's the 10-meter winds, sustained winds by tomorrow night, and you see they increase into the 20-knot range or so across the areas of the Central Valley here north of San Francisco. These are the Diablo winds. I'm not an expert on Diablo winds, but that's the name of them up here in the San Francisco area, and as you head into the interior portion of the state. So definitely an elevated threat for wildfires with on the backside of this system Tuesday night into Wednesday night, and then it probably ends by the morning on Thursday as the system pulls off to the east. Closer to home, we've got a sort of a general troughiness across the east this morning, with a ward max down in parts of Tennessee that swings its way to the east and then north by tomorrow morning. Still a lot of energy in the flow here. Not a lot of moisture to work with though. And it basically leads to a fairly quiet weather pattern for most of this week, at least into the midweek, where we finally get to see some rising heights for once this month, and some milder weather. We get close to 570 heights, and then by Thursday we see a few pieces of energy trying to move through the zonal flow. Trough digging into the upper Midwest by Thursday evening, fairly consistent on both the GFS and the European. A little more strung out vorticity on the European, and then by Friday morning, again, the flavor is similar here. The specifics are not, but trough across the Great Lakes. How compact is the energy? How is it a compact trough or not? And then the Euro is a little slower with it. The Euro is a little faster with it. Has an area, has this max across Maine by Friday evening, and the GFS is a little slower with it, still across the Northeast. So at the surface, we've got our system that moves off to the coast of Maine today, fairly quiet in its wake. Could be some showers here and there with, tomorrow, sort of low heights. Again, there's not a lot of moisture to work with though, but nothing significant, I don't think. High pressure builds in with that ridge in the upper levels by Wednesday afternoon, and probably turns into a pretty nice middle of the week here, especially considering the first half of the month. Thursday's quiet as well, maybe some more high clouds by the later in the day as the front starts to work its way eastward. And then you see this surface low associated with that upper level trough by Thursday evening. Looks like a mostly rain event, maybe some snow on the north side in Canada, but a rain event Thursday. The end of the week is interesting. I don't think it's very interesting here necessarily, but north of here looks like there could be a snow chance by Friday later in the day behind the front. It's probably more of a northwest flow type of thing rather than any type of significant snow event. But depending on how deep that trough is, could see some rain and this snow as the system pulls its way east by the end of the week. So overall pretty quiet. I mean, anyone have any thoughts on anything else, on at least for this week here, that they want to point out?
Could you show Saturday in Columbus?
We can do that, yeah. The all-important Big Ten East championship game, basically, in Columbus on Saturday. So we get to get into some disagreements with, as I mentioned earlier, how fast this trough lifts out of the west. So here's Friday. It's moving east, depends how fast you like it. Here's Saturday morning on the Euro with the trough over Missouri, a little bit less, sort of not as compact on the GFS and further east. At the surface, you've got the Euro now showing we've got a surface area of low pressure. You have a rainstorm in Columbus for the Euro. GFS says it's further south and east. We'll see what happens, obviously. I had here's the European ensemble mean. This is all surface low pressure centers, and then the mean plotted. So here's Saturday, 1 p.m. Pretty decent agreement of some area of low pressure across the middle of the middle of the Ohio Valley on Saturday afternoon.
That's the Euro.
This is the Euro ensembles, and the mean is what's plotted in the isobars of mean that's plotted. Each of the members is the pink L's there on the map. And then here is I don't have the upper air. Let me pull up Here's the mean upper air at 1 p.m. on Saturday. That seems to be a pretty good indication that there's a weather event happening in Columbus on Saturday afternoon. It'd be interesting to see what the GFS shows the 12Z. I don't know if it is in.
The two have been consistently different. The GFS has been advertising dry.
Yep, still dry. And here's it's close, but it's still dry. You know, if you look at the upper air here, so here's Thursday morning, fairly good agreement of this trough still dug in across the west. But by Friday morning, I mean, Euro's just much slower with it, as is its typical bias in these types of situations. Doesn't mean it's wrong, but the European tends to be on the slower side with these things, and the GFS is just not as progressive.
If it's raining at 1 o'clock in Columbus on Saturday, the European model is the clear winner.
Oh, absolutely. GFS has been consistent not showing it there. So Canadian's still coming in, but here's I don't know what's going on with the upper air here on the E-wall, but there's the 0Z Canadian, more in line with the GFS, maybe a little further west. Safe to say there's an area of low pressure somewhere between Indianapolis and Raleigh on Saturday, which indicates a pretty good chance of rain in Columbus. That's a good point. Thanks for bringing that up. Let's see, I think that's what I wanted to cover in the short range, just to look at sort of where we're going. Here's also the European Ensemble mean. This is the previous 5-day height anomalies at 500 millibars. So you can see that most of this week, you've got obviously a trough in the west. We're still a little troughy in the east. And then if we look out, sort of this is the 5 days ending next Wednesday, still a mean trough position over, the central to eastern part of the country. It's definitely milder here than it has been, but it's not warm by any means. It's more normal for this time of year, I think. And then if we go further out in time, again, we're still in generally a trophy pattern. Maybe a bit more zonal than as amplified as it was early in the month. And that sort of reflects itself in the temperature anomalies here, 2-meter temp anomalies. We don't see a lot of positive anomalies except maybe across parts of the northern plains. It's colder towards the end of the month, and this will get chopped off, unfortunately, but that's the 5 days ending on Thanksgiving, or sorry, after Thanksgiving. I guess we didn't look at Thanksgiving. That's also interesting, so we can end with that.
The Weather Channel's already typing it up.
Seems to be 10 days out.
Yep. So there's the 60 GFS with a significant area of low pressure over southern Ontario. European ends at day 10. Similar type idea, but details still to be ironed out. I was looking at this yesterday too. Yeah, the European, this is the Ensemble at 500 millibars, so still an indication there can be some type of storm system in the eastern part of the country on Thanksgiving. But where exactly, you pick your low pressure center you'd like. At that point, who really knows? But there's the mean here. You can see there's a mean area of lower pressure across the Great Lakes by Wednesday evening. So maybe that's something to look at. But overall, still uncertainty. A lot of it by Thanksgiving. Thanks for that. I'll take any questions or other comments on. Yeah.
Worked day shifts had the weather service last week, Wednesday, and it looked like I was concerned about low clouds today and maybe some drizzle. But what was interesting is the height fields. I got called in yesterday. The guy was sick. The height fields show a week of trough, a lot coming through there yesterday. And the height's never built across here at 500 millibars like I expected. But what was interesting yesterday is several times the sun came out.
Yeah.
Very thin layer of low clouds. You might suspect not much of anything, maybe some drizzle. But it snowed for a while.
That's a good
And
point.
once the heating died down, it didn't do anything. And coming home at midnight, starting to get some drizzle in the parking lot at work. Fortunately, when I did the forecast, I told my coworkers, if it clears out, you'll end moisture, if it stays cloudy, it ain't gonna get down to freezing. So pretty lucky we didn't have to worry about ice.
That's a great point. I didn't look at the weather for yesterday before yesterday. I was very surprised to see it flurry yesterday afternoon.
There's no high clouds and mid clouds above there,
Yeah.
I can tell. It's just a couple thousand feet of low clouds. They have a great summary on what's been happening.
Yeah, I can't remember the last time I saw flurries coming in from the southeast.
Yeah,
That was-
it was
yeah.
cellular.
Yeah, cellular.
Yesterday, coming in from the southeast.
It was really bizarre. I pulled the radar up and I was like, what is
Yeah, it was
that?
I don't know if I've ever seen it do that.
No, I haven't, but. Anyone else ever seen that here? That you can remember? May have happened, but nothing comes to mind. Any other comments? No? Great.
Thank you
Thanks,
very much.
everybody. Yeah.
Well, thank you everyone for coming out so far this semester. Of course, next week is Thanksgiving break, so we'll briefing, but we'll resume briefings after Thanksgiving. So have a great break, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. So do we want rain or do we want nice weather for